The epic is not over. The themes of the Iliad and the meanings within that we've gotten closure on so far are beautiful and true, but we have yet to find the good. It can't end here, otherwise what should we take from this? In our analysis of these last chapters of the Iliad, we will find the good. Hello and welcome or welcome back. Today we're reading the great books of Western civilization, beginning with the Iliad. I'm using the Robert Fagles translation. This is book 23. As always, I will begin with a brief plot summary and then go into analysis and commentary. Achilles returns to the camp and sets out a great funeral feast for all of the men gathered, casting off Hector's body to the side. Agamemnon and the other kings just barely convince Achilles to eat his fill of the feast, but do not succeed in convincing him to wash the blood and grime from his body and clean himself. He insists that he must burn and bury Patroclus' bones before he does so. Night falls and all of the armies sleep in their tents. Achilles, however, goes down to the shores of the sea and sleeps there. In the night, he receives a vision, a dream, that Patroclus' ghost comes and stands over him and begs him to bury his body soon so that he can finally enter the house of death. Achilles awakes and immediately goes with the rest of the Greeks to do exactly as the ghost said. They build a huge funeral pyre for Patroclus, on which they also sacrifice cattle and horses, dogs, and even some Trojan captives. Once the fire has burned out and Patroclus' bones have been retrieved, a day of funeral games begins. Achilles offers prizes from his treasure hoard for those who compete in a chariot race, boxing matches, wrestling, archery, spear throwing, and a foot race. Each of the well-known Greek fighters, captains, and kings take part. Achilles presides over the games and awards prizes at the conclusion of each event, sometimes to the losers as well. He also mediates and calms any disputes or arguments that arise. Some of the gods, most notably Athena and Apollo, also get involved to help their favorites win. The day ends without incident. In terms of the mythology, the Trojan War will continue for at least a little while longer. We still have yet to see Achilles' death, and the fall of Troy by way of the Trojan horse. And we're not going to see it here in the epic. In terms of the Iliad, the war is over. There will be no more battles, and the Greeks are the presumed victors. We know this because Hector, Troy's only hope, is dead. Andromache says as much about him in her lament. Astyanax, Hector's son, the lord of the city, so the Trojans called him, because it was you, Hector, you and you alone, who shielded the gates and the long walls of Troy. This, I think, is part of why Homer stops the battles for a chapter and just gives us a full day of peaceful activities. The war is as good as done. And yet, as Achilles tosses Hector's body off to the side, we're reminded that his own death, his destiny, is still also looming, just as it's been described for Patroclus or for Hector, and also as it will be described later for Achilles. The gods prevent Hector's body from suffering all of the damages that it normally would. Apollo keeps the sun off of him, Aphrodite beats off all the dogs and birds, and they also prevent it from getting all banged up from Achilles dragging it around. We've seen a goddess do this before. It was Thetis, and she preserves the body of Patroclus after he dies so that Achilles can go out to battle, kill Hector, and return. The gods are now doing the same thing for Hector's body to keep it preserved. That tells us that although Hector is not being returned to his people to be buried right now, maybe he will be. After Patroclus' ghost appears to Achilles, Achilles says this: "Ah, God, so even in death's strong house there is something left, a ghost, a phantom, true, but no real breath of life." I've talked before about how they believe that you're basically just a shade, a phantom of what you were. There is less of you remaining after death than there is before. Furthermore, I'm not even sure that what we see of Patroclus' ghost was believed to actually exist after death either. There will be a scene in the Odyssey when Odysseus descends into the underworld, and we see that none of the shades have any personality or ability to speak before Odysseus sacrifices to them. Whether this is just an inconsistency between two parts of the myth, or Patroclus being outside of the House of Death makes it different, or if it's just Achilles having a crazy dream, I don't know. The bulk of this chapter, though, is focused around the funeral games. I had thought going into this that a day of peaceful activities would give us a different look at some of these characters and what they act like in a peaceful setting. I was wrong. There are some rants and gloats and boasts that these fighters have while spectating events, participating, or arguing about the outcome that sound exactly like something they would say on the battlefield. Every little bit of the battle fury that they called up to kill people the day before is now here in their sports. This doesn't really bode well for them going home to peaceful lives, does it? Actually, it does. All people, and especially all men, have an instinct towards violence and high levels of competition. We've seen what that looks like in war, but now, through this chapter, we get to see that even in peacetime, this desire for competition, even sometimes for violence, can have a healthy, non-destructive outlet. For the Greeks, it was competition in sports. It's not the only way to redirect this desire, but it's definitely the most common way. And if you don't believe me, just turn on the TV. Although people get almost as mad as they would on the battlefield during the sporting games here, we see that there are also limits in place. Achilles stops Ajax and Odysseus from truly hurting each other while they're wrestling. And when little Ajax and Idomeneus argue about who's in front in the chariot race, Achilles jumps in and stops them from getting too heated. Finally, the dispute between Antilochus and Menelaus about the outcome of the chariot race is resolved without any bloodshed, even though Menelaus is mad enough to hit somebody over it. Although it's the same instinct at work, there are limits in place, understood by all, that enable it to remain peaceful. Also, I personally find it hilarious that Achilles declares the spear-throwing competition over as soon as Agamemnon volunteers to compete. He just immediately gives him the first prize and says, oh, you're too good of a spear thrower. There's absolutely no way that anybody could compete with you. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. But we also know that Agamemnon's a really sore loser. If there is even a chance that he would get second or third prize in this contest, that he would raise hell, he would cause problems, it might not end peacefully. So, by giving him the first prize from the outset, Achilles is being very diplomatic, surprisingly diplomatic, in stopping fights before they happen. But it's also just hilarious that that's the only way to deal with Agamemnon competing. So this chapter accomplishes getting almost everybody out of the warlike mindset and into more of a peaceful one. And that helps us to see what that means, what that looks like. However, despite his role as the arbiter of disputes and the keeper of the peace for the day, Achilles is still at war in his mind, and that has to be fixed before the end of the epic. And that's what we're going to see in the last chapter. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and learned something new, please comment below and let me know what it was. Also like the video and subscribe to the channel if you like what you see here, because we're going to keep going. We're going to finish the Iliad, and as I said last time, the next book is the Odyssey.